Welcome to the Her Story Circle podcast, the podcast that brings you the extraordinary tales of everyday women who are changing the world. I'm your host, Gertrude Mache, and I'd like to acknowledge traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today. I also like to pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging. Every week, we dive into the lives, challenges, and triumphs of women from all four corners of the globe. We're here to inspire, enlighten, and connect, sharing stories that uplift and empower. So grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and join us as we explore the incredible journeys of women shaping our future. This is Her Story, where every woman's voice matters. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Her Story Circle. This is Gertrude Mache here in beautiful Melbourne, Australia. And today I am graced with the presence of yet another fascinating woman. Welcome, welcome, welcome to our tribe. Please tell everybody your full name, where you're based, and share your story with us today.
Hi, Gertrude. My name is Andrea Simon, and I'm very happy to meet you and to share with your listeners my story. I have had a long, eventful life, so I guess I should speak more about my writing life. I'm from New York. I was born in New York, as many of you could probably tell from my accent. And although I don't think I have one, but everyone tells me I do. Anyway, I've lived in New York most of my life, except for 2 years in Maryland. And I'm one of these unique people in New York who's actually had a public school education from the first grade through graduate school. So I have my last degree was an MFA, and I got that pretty late in life. I was 65. Never too late is what I say. Anyway, so after graduating from college, in the days that I graduated, women did not have much of a choice of what they majored in college. And I was told that I should either become a teacher or a secretary. So neither of those appealed to me at the time. So I ended up being a caseworker for a short period of time. And then I worked in publishing for many years in various positions, all writing related, as a copywriter, as a proofreader, as an editor in some major publishing houses. And then as the years passed, I got married and I had a child. And I started my own business with a friend of mine. And it was an editorial production company. And we did newsletters and other types of material, basically for patients like on Parkinson's disease or other various diseases, and also fitness-related materials. And I did that for about 8 years. And then I was in my 40s, and I decided that I've always written my own pieces at home and in sort of small little magazines, but never seriously. So I took a photography course, because I'm also a photographer, and a writing course to decide what my future would be, and decided that I was a better writer than photographer. So I started writing first freelance for some of the clients that I left in my business. And then eventually I started writing my own books and articles and stories and that kind of thing. And fast forward, I have 4 books published. They're all different. There's one is a memoir, the first one, which I'll talk about later on. The other 2 are historical fiction. And then the 4th one is an anthology based on a course that I taught called Writing About Your Mom Without Guilt. And it was an online course, and the people, including a woman from Australia, and we liked each other so much, we decided to stay past the course's expiration. And for the next 2 years, we wrote other subjects besides our mothers, and we created an anthology, which was published last March, and it's been very successful. And I just signed a contract with a new publisher for a book called Did You Have the Life You Wanted, which is a kind of provocative question, I guess, and I'm hoping that will resonate with women, especially of a certain age. And that's where we're at now. So at this point in my life, I'm a full-time writer, and I do a lot of publicity and talk to a lot of people about my work, and especially the first two books, which are basically about themes relating to the Holocaust and Jewish heritage. So I do a lot of speaking and a lot of work on behalf of that. In 1997, I went on a trip with a Jewish Holocaust group to Eastern Europe. It was one of the first American groups of its kind to visit that area after the breakup of the Soviet Union. And the group went to Poland, to Belarus, and to Russia. And I was very interested because my grandmother's family was from Belarus, a small village called Volchin. And we left relatives there, although my grandmother and my mother, this is my mother's mother, and their family, which were 9 children, came to the United States by Ellis Island in the 1920s. They did leave a huge part of the family in this village, and no one ever heard from them after the war. So we assumed that they were killed, but no one knew exactly what happened to them. So on this tour, I was able to go to the village, and I met people also on a similar tour from Israel. And one of the people on that tour was from that same village and knew my family that was left there. So we went together to the village. He showed me where my family lived. It was my uncle at the time who had 3 daughters. And we spoke to people there. And then afterwards, we went to see other sites, including this area, which was in the middle between Minsk and Brest in Belarus. It was a forest called Brona Gora, where in 1942, over 50,000 Jews were murdered in mass graves. So this group that I was with went to that area, and we paid our respects. One of the men that I was with had been from that area, and he left in 1939 to go to the American World Fair, and he left his family there. And for the first time in his life, he found out that they were killed in this massacre, because there was a list of some of the people that were murdered. So afterwards, when the trip was over, people on the trip, which were basically including people from a Jewish cultural organization in Arizona, asked me to do, they knew I was a writer, they asked me to do a documentary about what we saw. But unfortunately, the guy who was with us, who was a videographer, was more or less taking pictures of people eating and dancing and having a good time, and not really the sites that we wanted to write about. But I decided to do a lot of research when I got home. And this was like in the very early days of the internet, so there wasn't too much available. And I did, and I also in the Israeli group told me that there was a woman in New York that I should look up that was from Volchin. And I did look her up. Her name was Hannah Kramer. And I came to visit her to interview her. And it turned out that she was my cousin from Volchin's best friend. So I had pictures of her, and she had pictures of my family. So it was amazing coincidence. And that's why that book is called Bashert. I'll hold it on to you, which means faded in Yiddish. And this is a picture on the cover of one of the cousins that were killed that was from Volchin. And I had found out that all the Jews were rounded up, like most of the Jews in that area, and were murdered in a group massacre. But the local people did not think my relatives were there at the time. So I've never really found out exactly what happened to them, but it is possible that they were killed in Brona Gora, that site of 50,000 Jews. So I took all the information that I got, and it was a lot. I did a tremendous amount of research. I translated materials. The guy from Israel hand drew a map of Volchin and mentioned every family and what they did for a living. I had a lot of firsthand interviews, and all that is in this book, which is like a combination of memoir, and it also contains expert testimony from the guys who ran the railroad railroad workers who recorded in detail how many Jews they took on each transport to Brona Gora and the exact details of it. So it's a very important book because it was one of the first of the second or third generation Jews writing about their family. And it also is a great testament to those who deny the Holocaust because there's so much information there. So after that book was published, I thought about one of the stories that I had heard about Brona Gora, which was recorded in 1944 when the Soviets occupation, they came into Belarus and freed the people. And it was a little girl who was 12 years old who was in the mass grave and was lying on top of all these dead bodies. And for some reason, maybe it was the tumults around her, nobody noticed. She crawled out of the pit and ran naked into the woods. And we know her name was Esfir. And we don't know, and she recorded her testimony of what happened. It's 3 paragraphs long, but we don't know anything more about her. So as the years passed after this book, Bashert, I kept thinking about that girl and how could she survive such a thing? So I wrote about other subjects, but then I decided that to really appreciate the anti-Semitism and the value of what life was like for the Jews, because I've since found out that they were killed in mass massacres in that area in almost every village and town. And it's one of the great mysteries of the Holocaust is that we know about the concentration camps, but we don't really know about all the massacres.
Let's just unpack your story. What an incredible journey you've been
Yes.
on, Andrea.
Yes, I just began.
Wow, wow, wow. You know, a lot of us hear about the Holocaust and the atrocities,
Yes.
and it fascinates me when I meet people like you who are really delving into history and bringing it to the mainstream so people can really truly understand what this was all about. So let's first of all start off with what initially drew you to the SF story and how did it evolve into a historical novel?
Yes. So as I was saying before, I was really fascinated about how anyone at that age could survive such an experience. So I had almost all the material already. I had her story, I had whatever, but I tried to find if she was still alive. I couldn't find any information about her. People in Israel found people with her name, but it wasn't her. And anyway, and then I said, well, the only way you could really appreciate what is lost is if you know how people lived. So I decided to write a fictional story of what Esfir's life could have been in the village that she was from before the war, including all the anti-Semitism that happened and the ghettoization and all that stuff, plus the massacre itself, and then the subsequent events, which I assumed killed all her family, and she was the only survivor. So the next thing out of that was the historical novel Esfir Is Alive, which is all the facts of the events are true, and the fact that she was really a person is true. And I put my relatives who were killed in the book as characters just to give myself the feeling that they're living again in some way, even if it's in a fictional way. But I put them in the right town. I gave them schooling that I knew that they had. And then I created a novel from it. And it's very relevant to young people who don't really know much about this. I mean, the only book they're probably familiar with is maybe The Diary of Anne Frank. But with Anne Frank, she was in hiding the whole time. This time, it's really active. You see how people live. It dispels a lot of the stereotypes of Jews as being passive and of being poor. Many of these village people were very self-educated. They were involved in political groups, in discussions. They did Shakespeare. They were really much more sophisticated than I expected. And I think by the end of the novel, you feel for these people. And that's really what I wanted young people to come away with, the sense of what was lost, because you don't really feel anything until you know what was there and how it was lost. And so that's where that book came from. So I have other books too, but we're talking about this basically. And these two books are very close to my heart, and I think particularly relevant in today's anti-Semitism, which is just getting crazy again.
Yeah, and it's funny that it is resurfacing again.
Yes, I mean it's never gone away, but it's now, out of hand. And I hear of all these terrible things that are happening to people at schools. There's a lot of unrest. There's a lot of disinformation out there, and people don't really understand the history of what Jews have gone through. And so I think when they understand it, the only way you combat prejudice, I feel, is through knowledge and understanding. And if you don't have any experience, then you believe all the crap that's out there. Excuse the word.
So true. So what was your research process for both these books?
Well, in the Bashert book, as I said before, I did most of my research in the very early days of the internet. And I remember putting the name of my grandmother's village on a search engine, and I got like about 3 million things. And there was absolutely none of them were the same village, because the Poles spell it one way, the Jews spell it a different way. And then when it was the Soviet, it was a different place. Sometimes it was Russia, sometimes it was impossible. Right. So I started going to this organization called YIVO, which is like a repository of all kinds of things from Eastern Europe. And I had the librarian there help me locate the town and give me some information about it. So, and then I started writing letters to everybody I knew in Belarus, in the newspapers there, and Jewish organizations. I interviewed as many people who I found had ties to that area as I could. Hannah Kramer, who I mentioned before, wouldn't give her story to the Shoah Foundation, which was Steven Spielberg's foundation, but because I was related to her in a way, she allowed me to interview her. So with all these sources, and then there's a website called JewishGen, GEN.org, and they specialize in all kinds of literature, including what they call memorial books, which are books written either by survivors or relatives of survivors about each village and town in that area. So you could read firsthand accounts of what life was like, especially before the Holocaust. So I really poured over all this material. I wrote to German officials. I wrote to Belarusian officials. I wrote to Russian officials. I emailed whoever I could. And then I started getting material in, and plus I had original sources in Russian, and then I had to hire translators. I had to hire someone in German, in Russian, in Belarusian, in Polish, and some relatives who spoke the languages helped me. And then I would see that the same event names were spelled differently, and interpretations were totally different. And I became sort of overwhelmed. I said, I'm not a historian. How do I verify this? So I decided that there was very little verification that you could do. You just had to report what I found and let the reader decide what happened. That's pretty much how I did it. And then when Esfir came, it was years later. So the internet was a little more, sophisticated by this point. But I had, frankly, all the research already about the massacres. There was very little that I learned new. And even if you Google these massacres today, you'll probably get me. And I donated all my material to this organization, so they would probably direct you there. But anyway, but because I'm such a stickler for facts, I researched the house that I thought Esfir would live in. So, I researched homes in Poland in that area, or dresses that girls wore in that area. So my research was more, I would say, pictorial at that point, because I was already creating the narrative of where they lived, and I wanted it to feel real
and authentic. So what aspects of your trip to Poland were the most impactful in shaping your writing, do you think?
Well, of course, we went to Auschwitz, and of course, I've been to Dachau and Theresienstadt, but nothing compares to Auschwitz. It's just mind-boggling, and it's humongous, and
Mhm.
it's overwhelming. But I would say the most impactful was going to Brona Gora, standing in the forest, and imagining 50,000 people killed there, and the coincidence of meeting people from my village was I didn't think I really had a personal story, because on this trip there were Holocaust survivors or people much closer to them, and I was sort of like removed, and I thought, well, I'll be happy just to see my grandmother's village. I didn't
Mhm.
realize that I had a real story. And so when I made that connection with the man from Israel who knew my family, and also Hannah Kramer, it became very emotional for me, and I felt like I felt a very personal connection.
Yeah, I've been to Auschwitz, and I have to say it is a place where every human being needs to visit at least once in your
Yes,
lifetime
yes.
to fully understand the scale of this atrocity. Otherwise, we talk about it, it sounds very conceptual. I was humbled when I stood in that space and just tried to imagine what that could have been like for the people who died there.
Well, that the concentration camps, a lot of people say who lived there, they didn't know what was going on. They couldn't even
Mm.
live close by, but everything was sort of in this concentration camp, and very few people got out to tell them. But with the massacres, it's a different story, because in all these villages and towns, the people were ghettoized, and then they had to walk or be transported in some way to a massacre site where the locals dug the graves. The locals took their belongings. The locals knew what happened. So the level of complicity
Mm.
and the inability to deny what happened is very strong, and is not really that written about, which I think is a very important thing, to because it's not a Hitler that's so horrendous. It's the people who follow
It's
him,
the people around it.
yeah,
Yeah.
who know
Yeah.
better. You know, so
Oh,
a big lesson for me was this
mm.
complicity.
So let's talk a bit about the writing process. How did writing a memoir and a historic novel differ for you?
That's a great question. Well, the memoir was really, as I mentioned before, had started off as a script for a documentary. So I
Yes.
had a sort of very visual kind of thing, this shot, that shot, and sort of a narrative there. And then it was so overwhelming that decided to sort of arrange it chronologically,
Right.
starting off with stories and interspersing it with stories of my grandmother's life, because she was an extremely interesting person. She was
Mm.
married 3 times, and she had an extraordinary life. She was a very charismatic character, and she influenced me greatly. So I interspersed her stories with how I was finding information, and how the information was sort of coinciding with my grandmother's experience, because in her own way she was typical of the Jewish story of immigration. She came to this country with 9 children, not knowing the language, and she was on one of the last ships that were allowed to come here, and so all that assimilation and strangeness of coming because of persecution and pogroms and things that were going on. I tried to intersperse it so that the reader will get to know my family's story as a representative of the Jewish story.
Right.
So I
Right.
basically wrote it in that way, sort of as if I was writing a diary. Whereas
Um,
the Esfir story, because it's a novel,
mhm.
it was more planned in the sense of what would happen and what would not happen. I mean, I knew pretty much what would happen to her, so it wasn't like I was going to make up the ending. But I did make up part of the ending. The fact that she survived. We know she survived, but we don't know how long she survived. But
Yes.
I wanted people to have some hope, so I made her really, really survive.
I love it.
But
So,
I followed that a few years later with another novel called
mhm.
"Floating in the Neversink," which is also a historical novel, and it's
Okay.
based on the growing up in the 60s and 70s in New York and in the Catskill Mountains. I don't know if you ever heard of the Catskill Mountains.
I have.
Yes, it's a very, you might have seen some of the movies, Dirty Dancing, or some of those movies about them.
Yes.
It was a very unique Jewish experience, where there were thousands of bungalow colonies and hotels and resorts, primarily all Jewish. And I went there every summer. My grandmother had a house there. And so that book is also similar to Esfir in the sense that it's based on autobiographical experience, but it's most of it's fiction. So I have this, I guess, crazy way of combining the two.
Oh, wow. What a fascinating process. So, how has your background as a photographer influenced your writing process, do you think? You sound very visual.
I'm very visual. Yes, I'm very visual. When I take pictures, if you take a look at them, you'll see stories in each one of them.
Yes.
I'm very interested in how people live, and I'm with hopefully in an artistic way. Taking into account the lighting and the combination of the composition. But basically, I want to tell a story. So when I'm writing, like for example, with Esfir, I had the picture that I decided was her house pasted on my wall. Next to that, I had a picture of what I thought she looked like pasted over. I was surrounding myself with photographs so that I had an exact idea of what I wanted to create. It's like being a movie, a filmmaker. You're building it, but it's all within your own little place. It's not, there. But I get very into it. I mean, maybe it's a little schizoid, but I get really into it, and I want to give my characters the freedom to have a life.
Yeah.
And when I know that that person is going off on their own, I feel she's no longer, under my charge, and I feel sort of liberated. So, and when I do my research, I have to see something. I have to see the town. I have to see the synagogue. I have to know where they are. I mean, it's not that I'm not capable of making it up, but it roots me into the reality of it all. And then I become crazily obsessive about stupid minutia that nobody cares about. For example, when I was doing Floating in the Neversink, I remembered there was a sign on the way to this country house where it said Fallen Rock Zone. It was like a mountain. So I wanted to write something about that. And then I said, I don't remember if it was fallen or falling. So I made my husband drive me to that spot to find out what it was. And guess what? It was both.
Oh,
There were two
wow.
signs that said both, once, a few miles apart. So I never satisfied that. But that's how crazy I can get about the pictorial representation should be real.
I love it. So, how did teaching writing inform your approach to writing Esfir Is Alive?
Well, I wrote Esfir Is Alive basically in 2016. When I went to graduate school, I went to the City College of New York, which is a public school, a public place. And what's wonderful about this school, aside from the fact that there are thousands and thousands of students, is that it's very multi-ethnic and it's very multi-age, and so there are people of all ages and from all countries, and a lot of people that had just come to the United States, the young people especially. It was during 9/11 time, it was after that, but people were still suffering from that kind of thing. So the students in general were so happy to be in school. They weren't jaded. They were just thrilled to be there. And when I taught them just basic composition, and it was a little difficult for some of them. They had to have a dictionary with them. But I was dying to teach them creative writing, and I finally did. So they gave me creative writing, and I had a wonderful time. I know from being in writing groups and taking writing courses over the years, I know the whole procedure of giving you prompts to write on and assignments and that, and I'm very receptive to that. And the students really related to that. So I would introduce a subject. I would tell the students how to critique, because there's really an art to critiquing, so that you're positive and you don't make somebody feel like they want to jump off the bridge, which sometimes you get a teacher who's just so mean, and they really put you down. So I had that experience when I was younger, and to me, I stopped writing because I thought, well, this person must be right. But so, I mean, I tried to create a supportive atmosphere, and then the kids went crazy. They wrote the most incredible stuff. And then years later, I taught a course online from this group called the Story Circle Network. It's an online group of women, and they have all kinds of courses. And first I taught how to write about your family, since I'm an expert at that. And then the second course I wrote was how to write about your mom without guilt. And that's when I mentioned before that I had about 8 other women from all over the country, plus one from Australia. And they had such a bonding experience that when the course was over, we continued to meet, and it turned into this anthology of their writing. And pretty much we stayed. I taught in the same way as I taught students in school, which is through encouragement, through prompts, through subjects, through writing essays. And it's amazing how good some of these women are professional authors like me, but a lot of them aren't. And you couldn't tell the difference by the time this thing was published. I was very proud of them. And it was very difficult to organize so many people with different writing styles and different ways of following deadlines and not deadlines and all that stuff. But it came out much better than I expected. And I really enjoyed doing it. And I'm very proud of these women.
I absolutely love it. So my last 2 questions are going to be a bit of a thought experiment. In the first question, I'm going to teleport you into the past. And you are going to go back and have a conversation with the younger you. The young woman who decided to go into the world of writing, was starting on her journey. If you could go back and give her 3 nuggets of wisdom, based on what life has taught you up until this point, what would those 3 nuggets of wisdom be?
It's funny that you say that, because the book that I'm just finishing is called, I think I mentioned that too, Did You Have the Life You Wanted? And it's really about looking past and looking before the journey to see how you evolved and whether you fulfilled what you really wanted to do. So it made me really do the same thing about myself. And I would say, looking at my younger self, I'm much better at this age than I was then in terms of having much more confidence. I don't think I had as much self-confidence as a writer as I did as a young writer. I think I didn't have a mentor or anyone who really encouraged me to do writing as a profession. In those days, it was not something you did as a woman. So I think I would look at myself and say, do what your heart tells you to do and don't do what is conventional. And then I would also say, after years of dealing with rejection and frustration, especially in the current publishing environment, which is really another subject of discussion, perseverance is really the key. And I really feel like I took that to the nth, and that I kept writing to people and calling people and contacting people, even with rejection after rejection, and I stayed with it, and I'm very happy I did. So maybe that's the second one. And the third is to not lock yourself into a lifestyle that's isolating, which writers could do. I'm very fortunate that I have 2 long-term writing groups, and we're very close. One has been running for over 30 years. And I have that support system that was good even during COVID. And even if we don't share our writings as much as we used to, we help each other, and we care about each other as friends too.
Last question, we're going to go into the future. And I'm going to teleport you to go and meet the 90-year-old you.
Not that far off.
And she is sitting surrounded by her family, her friends, whoever's going to be with you at the end. So if you could go and sit and have a conversation with a 90-year-old you,
Yes.
what will you say when you finally meet this wise woman?
Well,
What would you
I hope that first of all that I'm alive. Secondly, I hope that I have my wits about me. I hope that I know what's going on, and if I do, I hope I'm still writing, and I hope that I still could share my work with my family and friends. I hope I'm still participating in their life, and that's really where we writers get our most material is actually living it, going out and talking to people and relating to them. And I hope I'm a contributing member of society in whatever way I can be physically. I've had a lot of physical problems over the years, and I know that I can get through some of the worst things, but a lot of things are beyond our control. And I feel like I'm just happy if I could influence, let's say, my grandchildren, and my daughter is already grown, but I would like to be around to help in whatever decision she makes.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for coming online and sharing your amazing story with us today, Andrea.
Well, thank you for having me. It was great to see you.
And thank you to everybody who's tuned in. The Her Story Circle is not just a podcast. We are a social impact movement that brings you the stories and voices of people from all over the world. We share our stories to uplift you, to inspire you, to energize you, but most importantly, to take you from where you are now to where you're trying to go. So tune in again tomorrow when I interview yet another amazing guest. In the meantime, have a fantastic day, morning, or evening, wherever you are in the world, and bye for now. Thanks again, Andrea.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning into the Her Story Circle podcast. I hope today's story has inspired you to believe in the power of our stories and the difference you can make in the world when you use your voice. I'm Gertrude Mache, and it's been an honor to share this space with you, where voices from all walks of life come together to weave a rich tapestry of diverse perspectives. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast to help us share these stories with more listeners. Follow us on social media by looking for the Her Story Circle podcast for more updates. And join us tomorrow for another episode filled with courage, resilience, and empowerment. Remember, your story matters, and together we're building a stronger, more inclusive world. Until next time, keep making her story.